Welcome, everybody. Good morning. My name is Becky Zogelman. I'm an Associate Executive Director for Training Information and Development at CTA. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us here today as we have a really robust conversation and celebration of community schools in California. This is some ground rules just kind of for the reporters and stuff. We're going to ask all the reporters to please put your questions in the chat so we make sure that we get everybody's questions. And then we are also going to ask that the questions really be limited to about community schools, our topic here today, if possible. So please put all your questions in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the event. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to CTA President Toby Boyd.
Good morning. I'm E. Toby Boyd, President of the California Teachers Association. On behalf of our 310,000 educators, I want to welcome and thank you for joining us today for this newscast to mark a historical commitment to creating and expanding community schools. Our regular school year, and what a year has it been, may be coming to a year, but today California is launching its commitment to community schools. Community school partners as educators, students, parents, and community organizers utilizing a model of shared decision-making to provide academic, emotional, and community support for student success. California is leading this public school transformation thanks to a historic $3 billion investment, the largest investment of its kind in our nation. A few weeks ago, the State Board of Education approved the first round of planning and implementation grants for 268 school districts and community offices of education. All of us on this call today are here to celebrate the hard work that has been done by our governor, our state superintendent, Tony Thurmond, and the legislator, along with the State Board of Education, to get us to this point. Community schools have never been timelier as we work to help students recover academically, socially, and emotionally from the ongoing pandemic. Educators are deeply involved in community schools work in urban, suburban, and rural areas across the state. We know this is just the beginning in building the schools and communities our students and families deserve. This effort will take a continued commitment over several years for us all. We are very honored to be joined this morning by a powerhouse lineup of speakers who have shared commitment to meeting the needs of our whole students to the community schools. We have with us Governor Gavin Newsom, Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond, State Board of Education, Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, Dr. Karen Hunter Quartz, Director of the UCLA Center of Community Schools, and we are joined by educators, students, parents, and community organizers who know the work of community schools firsthand. With that, I am very pleased to welcome our first speaker, Governor Gavin Newsom. Governor?
I appreciate it, Toby. Thank you all for taking the time to be here, and thank you to Linda and to Tony and the team and everybody that is foundational in terms of being so essential in advancing this cause. Look, it's a remarkable moment we're living in, and I think that goes without saying. In so many respects, it's a remarkable moment we're living in, but a particularly remarkable moment as relates to the national conversation on public education and education reform, or the lack of a conversation that has any real meaning or substance. The biggest and perhaps loudest voices for education reform in the United States come from some East Coast, or rather Southern states, notably Florida, that have been talking about banning books, that have expressed offense to something called critical race theory, but having had a difficult time to identify exactly where and when it's been placed in our K through 12 education system, they're now turning the page to going after social and emotional learning. You've seen that clearly demonstrated by the governor of Florida. You've seen efforts around schools and school safety morph into conversations around schools becoming armed camps, not places of peace. Policies around doors and locks, And the contrast to this conversation, the contrast to the leaders that are assembled here today couldn't be more profound, couldn't be more pronounced. Over the last few years, something really exciting has been taking place and shape here in the state of California. With all the noise, it hasn't gotten the kind of attention that we believe, I think all of us believe it deserves, and the people of the state of California deserve. Creating a brand new grade, TK for all in the state of California. The work we have done to make real the promotion and promise over the course, quite literally, of decades, to extend the school day, after school for all California students, summer school for all California students. The notion that those two things alone are being advanced in this state are points of real pride, but also points of distinction. We are in a process of doing more to reimagine public education than I believe any state in this country. Not just TK for all, after school and summer school for all, the work you all did, we did together, legislature and many others, on universal school meals. No one does that. No one is doing that. We're very proud of that. We're also very proud of the fact that this state is investing in what brings us here today, and that's community schools. We recognize that we need to break down silos. We recognize we have to engage the community and engage parents in a much more dynamic and meaningful way, giving our community and giving our parents and families more choice, but also a voice that respects the professionalism that resides within our education system, but an important voice in building capacity and partnership and providing opportunities and expanding those opportunities by expanding those schools and engaging in a community construct and engaging community members, building public partnerships, not just public-private partnerships, engaging CBOs, and beginning to provide the kind of quality care for families that addresses not just academic needs, not just social emotional needs, but more broadly, the challenges that are persistent and consistent in communities large and small up and down the state of California. This opportunity around community schools is very exciting. Designed at the local level, funded by the contribution, $3 billion, which we initiated with the legislature, and another $1.5 billion we're requesting of the legislature in this fiscal year. The opportunity to reimagine and re-engage, the opportunity to provide supports that reside outside of the school system and bring those supports into the school system. All of that presents itself anew because of the work we're doing here today. And I'll just close because I don't want to belabor it, but I want to just express my extraordinary enthusiasm, not just gratitude, by the fact that, as Toby said, we've initiated this process. We're not just talking about it. Those 268 school partners in the county and school district level, the opportunities with now the $650 million of grants seeding this process, creating a point person at each one of these school sites to develop a comprehensive strategy is real now. It's not just being promoted, as well as expressing my gratitude to the partnerships that will help us oversee this in a much more granular level. And a macro level for that matter, and that's UCLA, the Alameda County District and their team helping us to really look at this design and to look at this proposal in a way where we can enliven others across this country to consider similar strategies. I'll just close again with just deep gratitude, particularly addressing, and I think this is important, for this initiative to address perhaps the most stress-filled issue of our time, and that's adolescent mental health. A critical component of community schools is addressing not just the physical, but adolescent mental health needs. This is part not just of the community schools initiative, but also part of the $4.5 billion we separately funded for all of our youth 0 to 25. No other state in the country. That's a critical component, these two pieces, to address the issue that's being debated in Washington, D.C., been discussed despite being funded in places like Texas, but is being advanced here in historic and unprecedented ways. Thank you to all of you for being so forceful in your advocacy to move us in this direction. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you, Toby, and your team and the board for making real something we've been talking about for quite literally decades in this state. And this community schools initiative that's just getting started, I think, is going to have a profound impact for a generation of kids. And I couldn't be more proud of you, CTA and others, and all of our team for their strong advocacy over the course of the last number of years. So forgive me, everybody, for being long-winded, but I'm really excited and proud to be here talking more about this remarkable initiative.
Governor, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for those words. They're well said. At this time, I would like to bring up our next speaker, who is the president of the State Board of Education and someone who has been a leader in public education for decades. We are so fortunate to have her voice leading our state. President of the State Board of Education, Dr. Linda Darling Hammond. Dr. Hammond.
Toby. And thank you, Governor. I want to thank the Governor for his extraordinary commitment to all of California's children and to meeting all of their needs for thriving. California's investments have indeed led the states in supporting recovery. And in the case of education, this is also not only recovery from the pandemic, but recovery from a couple of decades of disinvestment in public education. We are now, with this latest budget, up to about $22,000 per pupil in commitments to education, a huge increase of more than a third from just a few years ago. So this community schools piece is a critical part of it. The budget that we proposed in 2021, which included all of those elements that the governor spoke about, is important. And the community schools model actually provides a means to incorporate all of those investments: nutrition services, access to physical and mental health care, increased training and support for educators. The before and after school programs will be coordinated and orchestrated to reach the needs of children and families by these community schools. So what does a community school look like? Quite often, these schools are open from early in the morning until into the early evening. They'll often have a health clinic available to families, an after-school program for children, which will offer recreation and enrichment, as well as homework support and sometimes one-on-one tutoring, education for adults in support of literacy, English learning, job training, sometimes in communities that have high rates of housing and food insecurity. The school not only serves meals, but also has washers and dryers for families who need to clean their clothes. One community school in San Francisco, the Buena Vista Horace Mann K-8 Community School, houses families at night. The community school coordinator knows the families in every community school and helps ensure that there are translation services. During the pandemic, at Duarte High School in Los Angeles County, the community school coordinator helped to reach out to every family to find out who needed digital devices and hotspots, helped coordinate special education supports, created a newsletter and outreach to keep parents involved. They conducted daily Instagram-based school announcements, drawing views from more than 600 students every day of the 800 who attend the school, celebrated college acceptances, birthday shout-outs, gave a daily resource for information. It is the lifeline of the communication. Duarte is one of LA County's network of community schools funded under our pilot project of a few years ago. Oakland has been operating a set of community schools for a number of years, nearly all of which house or are close to a health clinic. They work on infusing social emotional learning and supports into school. They replace suspensions with a strong set of community supports and restorative practices that help teachers and counselors get to know students well, help them feel connected to school, access supports when they're needed. Oakland Community International High School serves more than 90%, serves newcomer students, more than 90% of whom graduate, most of them going on to college. A third of them come to the country unaccompanied. And the community school services provide everything from supports for those young people for housing and nutrition and everything that accompanies that, and those additional supports. So the community school investment of $3 billion over 7 years, $4.5 billion if the May budget is enacted, is clearly a commitment to ensure that our students are happy, healthy, and thriving at school. We have adopted a California framework for community schools. The California Department of Education, we'll hear from State Superintendent Thurman in a moment, and the State Board have been working in partnership to paint a framework that includes all of these pieces of care inside the school, inside the way in which regular classrooms operate, and the supports around the edge of the school. Evidence does show that community schools work. Learning Policy Institute did a review of more than 140 studies several years ago that documented gains in attendance, school progress, achievement, and graduation experienced when all of these factors are brought together in community schools. We are prioritizing funds for those schools serving more than 80% high-need students. I don't know if people realize that in California, more than 60% of students are low-income students. And that means that there are a wide range of needs that are needed. The governor mentioned that we've already allocated funds to 268 school districts, county offices of education, and charter schools. Some of these are planning grants, which 192 school districts have received to get going on the concept. Another batch of funds are for 5-year implementation grants for between $100,000 and $500,000 per school site, depending on the size. And then we have a LEAD Technical Assistance Center grant to the Alameda County Office of Education. Special thanks to L.K. Monroe, the superintendent there, who's leading a partnership with UCLA Center for Community Schooling, Californians for Justice, and the National Education Association. And we will have local regional hubs to support these schools in learning how to do the work that will wrap around their services, wrap around their students and family with care and with support.
Darling Hammond, thank you very much. I appreciate those words. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague who has been leading this work within CTA Vice President David Goldberg. David?
Thank you, Toby. And I'm just honored to be here and let you know that in CTA, we are all in. We, on the backs of these last years that have been so hard for so many of educators and communities and families. And we hear a lot of talk about we just need to get back to normal. And I think Ms. Darling Hammond brought it up, Dr. Darling Hammond, that our normal was not meeting a lot of our needs, right? When we have 60% of our students living in poverty, when we have decades of disinvestment, we're all in about really creating a new normal. And I think that's what we're all about, that a normal that takes into account the power that we all collectively have. And so as CTA, we are all in about bringing our part of that power to the table. But we know that our real power resides with our community, with our students, with our families, with the governor, with the state superintendent, all of us here. This is our collective effort, and we want to do our part. And so we've, from San Diego to Los Angeles, Bay Areas, rural, urban, suburban, as Toby talked about, our educators are in support of community schools because we know that what the challenge that they face inside the classroom are magnified and only can be solved by a deeper investment in all the issues that also go outside the classroom. Academic learning does not exist separately from social emotional learning. We also, in a moment where, as the governor was addressing as well, where democracy itself is under attack, we really value the importance of saying that nothing about us without us. That when we talk about community schools, we are in essence developing democratic processes, school by school, community by community, where the voices of our parents, students, educators, and administration are all in the table talking about what our needs are, really putting out their needs, but not just our needs, but also really looking deeply at our community for our assets. Because we know if we are to survive this and move forward, it's also going to be really developing and figuring out how to engage the power that already exists in our community. We know no two community schools will look alike because when done right, a community school really draws on the unique strengths of its neighborhood to respond to the unique needs of the students. Stakeholders of each community school will be engaged deeply in questions of what do we need and what assets do we have. And and again, this is not just experiment or just throwing good money after bad. This is something that, as we've seen, and I know Linda Darling-Hammond has been part of these studies actually for decades now, for a long time, showing the transformational power of this when it's done right. And so this commitment to shared decision-making, this commitment to seeing our power in our communities and in our schools is something we intend to support all the way through. And I know it takes all of us really working to make this happen. And so the next voice I want to bring to the table is someone who's also been a champion of this, someone who's played their role in ways in big and small and really uplifting the transformative nature of community schools. And that's Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurmond.
David, thank you. Toby, thank you, everyone at CTA for continuing to champion the importance of community schools. Just last week, California hosted a National Community Schools conversation. And with the important work that you're hearing today, California is clearly leading the way in the nation on community schools. Thank you to our governor and the legislature for providing these important resources and vision, to Dr. Darling-Hammond and to the members of the state board who've been involved at every turn of the way in helping to make this $649 million, this first investment in the $3 billion investment possible, to make sure that there's a strong framework, but also to make sure that at the end of the day, every school can have a community school coordinator who can help to connect students and families to important resources that they need. The reality is that community schools have been important since before the pandemic. Community schools has been a movement for a long time. I first learned about community schools in 2008 as a school board member. Back then, we were talking about becoming a full-service community school district, but we didn't have the resources to do it. What the governor and the legislature have provided has given us a way to put meaning behind our words, to provide implementation in our communities. As important as community schools were at that time, we know that since the pandemic, the need for community schools has grown even more. The pandemic itself and the loss of lives and the trauma that many have experienced, the trauma from the impacts of the acts of hate that we've seen, the killing of George Floyd, the spike in hate against the Asian American Pacific Islander community, the attacks and bullying around the nation on LGBTQ plus children. Community schools can't fix everything, but it is an important strategy to help us address what I think is the critical need at this time, addressing the social, emotional learning needs of our students, addressing the trauma that our students have been through. And we always say, think of community schools not just as something by itself, but in context of all the great resources that California is providing. You heard the governor outlay them. Think about it in connection to a $4 billion mental health strategy that means there's no wrong door for youth to go through, universal meals, universal preschool. All these things together means that we have a way to transform California schools. It means that we have access to health resources and mental health resources and social service resources to help students and families who are in need. But it's more than that. It does create a way to transform school climate and to say that we can close the school to prison pipeline, that we will educate and not incarcerate our kids. California, with this significant investment, is leading the way. And we're excited to work with all these partners in this first round of community schools. As you've heard, schools that have 80% students of need represent 80% of those who will receive grants in this allocation. And we are looking forward in hopes that the legislature will approve what the governor has proposed, an additional $1.5 million in community schools. That's one of the conversations that we continue to have with our districts. And we know that the UCLA Center and Alameda County will have in their technical assistance role. How do we leverage these dollars to go further? How do we leverage federal dollars like Medi-Cal and other resources to continue to grow the investment? But for now, we hearken towards the future and the passage of this year's state budget to see hopefully the passage of $1.5 billion additional dollars for community schools to continue meeting the need. As someone who's worked on community schools, as a school board member, as a legislator who's advocated for it, and as someone who's trained as a social worker who's done work in our schools around school-based mental health, we know that these are resources that not only address the social needs of our students, but as you heard from President Darling Hammond, address those needs in a way that align with what happens in our classroom and that promotes academic well-being and achievement and success of our students. So thank you to all the partners who are here today, who will be working on a community schools strategy. Thank you to the staff at the Department of Education and the Board of Education who work to vet these grants and to create the framework and to get these resources out into the community. And we look forward to the important work that lies ahead for us as we support our students, our families. I can't tell you how many town halls there have been to hear input from community members, students, and parents. This is a California tradition, and we must continue to listen and partner with our students and families and deliver these incredible resources on behalf of nearly 6 million students in our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Thurman. I appreciate those words. They're really heartfelt. At this time, I would like to bring up our next speaker, who is Dr. Karen Hunter Quartz, Director of the UCLA Center for Community Schooling. Dr. Hunter Quartz, excuse me.
Thanks so much, Toby. Thanks for inviting me to share how our team envisions supporting the state's historic investment in community schools. First and foremost, our technical assistance will be grounded in the 4 cornerstone commitments outlined in the state's framework, commitments that are vital to embracing a multiracial democracy across our diverse state and disrupting the usual siloing of reforms. The technical assistance we will provide will build on student, family, and community assets, will create and sustain racially just school cultures, will engage students in powerful, culturally rich learning experiences, and will ensure that school communities are part of the democratic process. To operationalize these commitments, we will draw upon the complementary experience of 4 organizations to support the learning of regional and local community school leaders. As the lead county agency, Alameda County Office of Education will ensure that our technical assistance will seamlessly integrate into the state's larger system of support for education. As the state's higher education partner, UCLA will create community-based learning opportunities, as well as support the collection and use of data and stories to inform change. The NEA Community Schools Institute is currently a national hub for technical assistance with a wealth of resources and learning opportunities that we will adapt for California. And Californians for Justice engages young people to promote racial justice and improve their communities. Listening to student leaders will be essential to our statewide learning about how to transform the way young people experience school. As a team, leaders from our 4 organizations are meeting regularly to bring to life the shared vision we proposed for statewide learning and technical assistance. This vision includes building awareness about community schools, convening an advisory group, hosting webinars, and promoting learning on the ground through study tours and other opportunities. We will be releasing more details later this month about learning opportunities and resources for the current cohort of state grantees. In these early days, we encourage teams to spend time on the critical first stage of implementation, bringing people together to develop a shared community-based vision of schooling to guide your efforts. Have conversations with students, families, educators, partners, and others about what you value and what it will take to transform education in your community. We know from extensive research that unless we approach change together in community, the status quo and reform silos will prevail. So we look forward to serving the state to ensure, in the words of John Dewey, that schools are not places set apart in which to learn lessons, but are truly the social centers of community life. Thank you.
Dr. Hunter Quartz, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Now getting to the heart of community schools, I'm pleased to welcome Joel Baca, who is the Community School Coordinator at the Los Angeles Schools of Global Studies. Joel?
Morning, everyone. My name is Joel Baca, Community School Coordinator at the Los Angeles School of Global Studies, located at the Miguel Contreras Learning Complex. I've been a math teacher for LAUSD for 20 years and served in this position for the last 3 months before the global pandemic took place. Our school is located in a densely populated but vibrant neighborhood of Westlake North, just west of downtown Los Angeles. And even though our proximity is close to downtown, our school finds itself in both a health and food desert. I'd like to give a few highlights of the work that we have done as a result of being a community school. At the beginning of the pandemic, as our district went into remote learning, we made sure that we had all hands on deck. Teachers, staff members, support staff made countless numbers of phone calls to both students and to parents just to check in and to identify any needs that were being had. We found that our students and their families were living through various inequities, such as housing, job, and food insecurities. We saw how wide the digital divide was, as our students weren't able to log into their classes or were being dropped from their meetings due to connectivity issues. As a result, we used alternative forms of communicating and engaging with our parents using the platforms that they were already familiar with. We shared information and resources which allowed some of their housing and food needs to be met. We connected with families around vaccination centers once they were up and running. We helped navigate the cumbersome process for getting those vaccinations within our community and in our school site. As a community school, we wanted to make sure that our well-being center was up and running to address the health concerns of our students. We also made sure that our Dream Center and our Mayan Language Club were up and running to create a welcoming environment for those students as they were coming out of the child concentration camps at our borders and throughout our country. While at the same time, working to have our students be both college ready and career ready. The crisis caused by the COVID-19 pandemic has brought the challenges that our students and their families face to public's attention. These challenges existed well before the pandemic, and that's why community schools are essential, and community engagement is key in order to create a culture of care that our community needs. I would like to end by thanking our elected officials by showing through this great example of how our values should be reflected in our budgets. Y unas palabras en español para nuestros medios de comunicación en español. Quiero dejar saber que el crisis causada por la pandemia de COVID-19 ha llamado a la atención del público sobre los desafíos que enfrentan nuestros estudiantes y sus familias. Esos desafíos existían mucho antes de la pandemia y es por eso que las escuelas comunitarias son esenciales y la participación comunitaria es clave para crear una cultura de cuidado. Me gustaría terminar agradeciendo al gobernador y los otros funcionarios electos, mostrando que a través de este gran ejemplo, cómo nuestros valores deberían reflexionarse en nuestros presupuestos. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vaca. Appreciate that. Our next speaker is joining us today from Fremont High School in Oakland, where she was a sophomore, she will be a sophomore next year. She is also with Californians for Justice. Please welcome Diana Matias Carrillo. Diana?
Yes, hi. Hello, my name is Diana Matias Carrillo. I'll be starting the 11th grade in the fall at Fremont High in Oakland, and I'm here as a youth leader with Californians for Justice. CFJ is a racial justice organization that helps students connect with their cultural backgrounds and become great leaders to transform public schools. CFJ is part of a statewide alliance of community organizations, policy advocates, and researchers called the California Partnership for the Future of Learning. We share a vision for transformational, racially just, relationship-centered community schools. I'm excited for many California districts and schools like Fremont High who are getting this money for community schools. It means my school can focus on having more classes where we can talk about current events, things like the Black Lives Matter movement and how abolishing the police impact our lives. It's more of an opportunity for students to prepare for the real world. Students struggle a lot in their lives, which means school isn't the only thing we worry about. Having resources for community schools could mean we can have more classes where students speak their minds and have empowering relationships with adults. And while I'm excited about these resources, students need to be the foundation to community schools. Like many students, my life was changed in March of 2020, and school stopped being the only priority for me. During the quarantine, I started taking care of my baby sister while also going to my online classes. Students aren't robots. You can't program them to learn just about the past. We need schools that make space for students to bring their communities and neighborhoods. We need to have classes that talk about our history, cultural roots, and what it means for the future. By learning about our cultures with each other, we can start to change the racism that exists. We can start to heal past and present generations. We can become the leaders who transform our communities. Community schools offer a safe space to students that feel lost in a world where there's still major systems of oppression. Students of color need a place where all their identities and complex experiences are celebrated. So we need schools that see students as their whole selves. But to make this happen, it's important that students are making decisions with families, educators, and policymakers on how to use this funding for community schools. Black and brown students are engaged and ready to make decisions. Students are the experts in what they need to succeed. We owe it to our youth and families to listen and invest in what matters to them. Thank you.
Diana, thank you very much. Couldn't say it better. I appreciate those words. At this time, as we've said, and we've continued to state, that parents are very critical in the process of what goes on in our community schools. So I would like to next have Carla Garcia, a parent of a sixth grader at Palms Elementary School in Los Angeles and a member of Palms Community School Leadership Council. Ms. Garcia, you have the floor.
Thank you. I am Carla Garcia, and I do have an 11-year-old boy who's finishing. He's a rising fifth grader and will be in sixth grade at Palms Middle School next year. At Palms Elementary School, my boy is a student for advanced studies program. He also plays trumpet in Palms Orchestra. He also is in the performance dance group, Grupo Folklorico. He is also a member of his student council, and he's also in his robotics class. These are just some of the opportunities our school offers their amazing students already. And as a community school, we'll be able to listen to our kids and offer and provide so much more so that they know that their needs are listened to. And that's why I'm so proud to be a member of Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles. Reclaim Our Schools Los Angeles is a coalition of parents and students and educators and community members. And we work, not only do we fight for our children, we listen to our children. And we fought really, really hard for community schools. And I'm so thrilled that our little Palms community is now a fully funded community school, and our kids will know that their voices will be heard. We've already given surveys to our fourth and fifth graders, and it's our students who want the full-time nurses because they get sick on other days besides every other Friday and would like somebody to be there for them. And it's our students who want longer library hours because every other Wednesday with your class is not long enough to go and maybe decompress with a good book. And it's our kids who want the green spaces because they're tired of ruining their clothes and getting bumps and bruises if they fall on our blacktop, because that's all our school has is blacktop. And as a community school, now those things are going to change. And from the parent's perspective, back to the green spaces, I pick up my kid. I walk to get my kid. And from a half a block away, I can see the greenhouse gases, the heat steaming off the blacktop. And I know my kid has spent all day in that. It's miserable for me as a parent just to stand there and pick up My kid, what's it doing to my, what's it doing to our poor kids' lungs? Well, there's a solution to that. Our community school team is working with our Palms Neighborhood Council, and we are securing funds so that we can really have those green spaces for our kids so they don't have to sit out there and stand out there and worry about, are they going to get hit or hurt if they try and catch a ball? So as a community school, voices of our parents, of our teachers, we all come together to make sure our little community will thrive. And, I know in the big picture, Little Palms Elementary School is only a grain of sand. But if that grain of sand touches another grain of sand, which touches another grain of sand, before you know it, the whole landscape has changed. So I really want to thank all of our public officials and everybody here who is working on changing the landscape of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Garcia. And you couldn't have said it better. It's going to take the whole community, including parents, community leaders, educators, students, and administration to bring this together to make each of our communities uniquely positive in the places that our students need. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Our last speaker today is an educator who's leading this important work in his community. Francisco Ortiz is a 5th grade teacher and the vice president of the United Teachers Richmond. Mr. Ortiz?
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Francisco Ortiz, and I'm a 5th grade teacher in the West Contra Costa Unified School District, and also serve as vice president of United Teachers of Richmond. I'm excited about the Community Schools Partnership Program because it is a historic, equity-driven value statement, declaring loudly that California believes that all students, no matter their neighborhood or zip code, deserve a great and supportive public school. As a former student and now teacher in Title I schools, I know that the community, cultural, and linguistic wealth our students and families bring into our schools has been much greater than the financial investments and structural supports that allow our diverse student populations to thrive at their full potential. That is why I'm incredibly excited that my home district, West Contra Costa Unified, was awarded the 5th largest Community Schools Partnership Program grant in the state to develop and strengthen our community schools program for 22 schools in our district. What's even more exciting is that with this grant, we have an opportunity to strengthen relationships and trust between families, students, teachers, and community partners to create the conditions to support caring for the whole child. In West Contra Costa, district leaders, educators, local government, families, community partners, and the county have collaborated to develop a shared vision and created participatory practices for engagement and input to leverage the varied expertise of all stakeholders. We launched an intensive discovery process to build the basis for a longer-term continuous improvement strategy of the district's community schools program with the goal of every school in our district to become a community school. The 1,500 educators comprising the United Teachers of Richmond fully support community schools, and we will continue to collaborate with district and all stakeholders throughout this process. We have engaged students, families, educators, and our community to build long-term strategic and implementation efforts as we continue our journey towards becoming an equity-focused community school district. Now for our Spanish language media, I'd like to add a comment in Spanish. Mi nombre es Francisco Ortiz y soy maestro de 5º grado y todos los días veo estudiantes entrar a mi salón de clases con dones y un gran potencial, pero también enfrentando tremendos desafíos. A través de las escuelas comunitarias, California está demostrando que creemos que todos los estudiantes, independientemente de su vecindario, código postal o antecedentes, merecen escuelas públicas excelentes y que los apoyen. En mi distrito, el Distrito Unificado de West Contra Costa, estamos en el proceso de transformar 22 de nuestras escuelas en escuelas comunitarias, reuniendo a familias, maestros y socios comunitarios y desarrollando una visión compartida de lo que queremos que sean nuestras escuelas. Gracias.
What can I say about this, folks? If you were listening from Mr. Ortiz to the very beginning with the governor, it was mentioned that our community schools are unique to their own individual locations. It takes everyone that's going to be involved, the educator, the parents, the students, the communities, the administration. They are the ones that are going to shape the community school in which they are located. I'm going to turn it back over to Becky Zogelman because I think that there's questions that are in the chat. I appreciate you folks for being here. And Becky, let's hear the questions.
We just have two questions so far from John Fensterwald and also from Blake Jones at Politico. They're both basically the same, so I'm going to kind of put them together. It starts out with the legislature did not include the $1.5 billion that Governor Newsom has requested for community schools in his alternative budget. The question is, why is there a need for extra money at this time when the $3 billion has not been allocated quite yet? And then building on that, also asking from Politico, what do we see as the chances that that 1.5 billion will get in, and that we have any chances of swaying the legislative leadership on these budget decisions before the June 15th deadline? So I'm going to turn that, Toby, to you and David first, and if there's also any of our, if the governor and others would also like to weigh in on that.
I'll weigh in after Toby. Go ahead, Toby.
Thank you. CTA supports the Governor May revision proposal to provide additional $1.5 billion in one-time funding for the California Community Schools Partnership Program. The funding will ensure that more schools can receive grant funding to implement the community schools model. During this moment, as our schools are addressed with challenges that was created before and now especially exemplified through COVID-19, schools have emerged as an intricate center for our communities, activities for the youth and families to get meals, essential supplies, and meet other needs. In this sense, schools have gone way beyond the place of educational services delivered in this space, where communities and neighborhoods are challenged and those solutions can be presented. These activities are often a new opportunities to re-envision what community schools look like. So as the money may not be in the revision right now from the legislature, we are hopeful because this is not just a one-time situation. We're looking for, this going on so that we can truly envision and reshape the way that education is delivered to our communities. David, do you have something?
I think Dr. Hammond, you wanted to join?
Yeah, I just want to say that, we did a very rapid process to begin to get this going in the field. And we granted 192 school districts planning grants, all of whom are promised at least 5 years of implementation funding when they finish their planning process. And then there will be another round of planning grants and implementation grants. We were oversubscribed for the amount we thought we would spend at this point, and it is estimated if we do reach all of the schools that serve 80% or more of students who are low-income students, that we will need that additional $1.5 billion. And many of the districts also brought in proposals for networks of schools that include schools, with 70 or 75% of students living in poverty, also very worthy and very deserving. So we're quite confident that this money will be needed. It will be needed soon, and we need to have it allocated at a moment that allows us to spend it over the coming year and the year after as these additional implementation grants come online and new planning grants get issued. The enthusiasm in the field is very strong, and a lot of places felt that they couldn't respond as quickly as we needed to move this year, but they're planning to.
Thank you, Dr. Hammond. At this time, I have no more questions in the chat from any of the reporters. So like I said, you have one last chance there, but if we have none, we will wrap it up for the day. I just want to thank all of our speakers as well. As Toby and all of them so eloquently said, this is truly a historic moment in California for public education and an opportunity for us to make true difference for meeting the needs of students in their local communities. So thank you all for your time today.